All right, welcome everybody. My name is Don Newman. I'm one of the admins of the Facebook group, and I teach Algebra 1 primarily at a private school in Baltimore, Maryland. We have a couple other members of the Facebook admin team here. They'll introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abigail Bates, and I teach high school in Central California. And so it's great to be here with everyone today. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Dana Carey. I'm in
Dana, you hit mute on accident.
I didn't hit it. I somehow got hit. Anyway,
Okay.
I'm Dana Carey. I'm from the Nashville area, Tennessee, and I teach 7th grade math.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Harrell. I'm from north of Houston, and I currently teach science in junior high.
And of course, we have Peter Liljedahl here with us, our guest star of the day. I think this is the 7th time we've done this, Peter, over the last couple of years. It's amazing, and so thank you so much for joining us again.
Well, I'm just super appreciative that, first of all, the admin team gives up their Sunday to do this. And then I'm so impressed that all of these teachers are coming in here on a Sunday afternoon/evening to participate in this. I love these sessions. This is probably my favorite medium, that Q&A sort of ability to talk to people and offer some of the things that have been happening in building thinking classrooms between books and between presentations and so on.
All right, well, so that's a good segue. So we're going to ask Peter some questions and kind of open-ended questions and let him talk to these issues. We're going to stick primarily, but not exclusively, to some of the new research that he's done since the books have come out, because that's not as readily available to everybody as what's in the books. So one of those changes that came about based on the new research is the changes to what was Chapter 12, evaluate what you value. I think there's been changes to the rubric and when it should be implemented. So if you could speak to that, Peter, that would be great.
Oh yeah, I'd love to. Okay, so this is to me probably the most exciting thing that's happening in building thinking classrooms these days. And it's this change around, as you said, Chapter 12 and how it's coming in earlier in the framework, but also the way it's stripped down and more easily implemented in classrooms quickly. So first of all, let me give you a little bit of background. Okay, so Chapter 12, for those of you who haven't read that far, is evaluate what you value. It's how we use a very different type of rubric structure to shape student behavior in the classroom. And this is really important. We all know this, right? Like anybody who's implemented building thinking classrooms knows that if the students are not behaving well, it's not going to go well. And this Chapter 12 is about how we shape that. One of the things that's interesting about that is that we know that okay, let me start over on that. In a traditional classroom, in a normative classroom, the teacher exerts a fair bit of control, and the students are operating under conformity and compliance, right? And we control their behavior through these routines that we have set in place. When we implement building thinking classrooms, there is a release of control. It becomes more student-centered. The students have more autonomy, and not everybody seizes on that autonomy in the best way. Right. So then we've given them this freedom to work in their groups and so on. And students may not actually be doing the work. They may use that opportunity to walk across the room and visit a friend under the guise of borrowing an idea, or they may be talking to their group mate, but not about what the topic is. They could just be hanging out, chilling, doing nothing, waiting for their turn. A lot of teachers have said this, that they see a lot of misbehaviors and that they see the students engaging in what we call turn taking, which is that one person will do the first task and then somebody else will do the second task and somebody else will do the third, and so on and so forth. And this is sort of some of the lived realities of implementing a thinking classroom. Chapter 12 was meant to remedy this. Now, Chapter 12 is chapter 12 because it's in the fourth toolkit. In the original research, where I did the work on trying to figure out which practices belong where in terms of an implementation model, it ended up in the fourth toolkit. And I believe it was because teachers, they were sort of implementing building thinking classrooms in a vacuum, right? They had never, in that research, they didn't know anything about it. They were receiving this professional development. They were going out and trying these things in their classrooms. They weren't sort of prepped for it ahead of time. And chapter 12 very much felt like assessment. Even though it was very formative and very informal in structure, it still belonged with that cadre of assessment practices. And it was a lot of change for these teachers, right? We're going to be using random groups. We're going to get them up at the whiteboards. I'm not answering their questions. And what's this thin slicing thing? It was just a lot of stuff on the go. And anything that's assessment, I'm just going to relegate until later. And that's how it ended up in the fourth toolkit, because that's where the teachers were ready to embrace it. But now that's not the reality anymore. Teachers who pick up the gauntlet to implement building thinking classrooms in their room, they've heard of it. They have a colleague who's doing it. They may even have dabbled with it a little bit before they even pick up the book and start doing it. So they're much more prepped. The students that you're teaching may have experienced it in years prior. So it's a different landscape. So if I was to do that research now, that really exhaustive, like 2-year project to figure out where teachers, which order the practices would be in, I'm sure it would look different. So that's part of this story. Another part of the story is that I've been analyzing some quantitative data. Now, it's not my thing to do, but I have been analyzing quantitative data. I have access to about 500 data points of teachers who have been implementing thinking classrooms and then correlating their implementation with their students' individual performance on standardized assessments. Okay. And one of the questions I've been asking myself is, which practices have the biggest impact on student individual performance? And maybe the biggest is not the right word. What is the impact of individual practices on student individual performance? And as I was analyzing this data, one of the really surprising things that came out of it was, of the teachers who are implementing chapter 12, they are seeing the biggest improvement in student performance on individualized standard assessment. Okay, so let me just say that again. The teachers who implement chapter 12 are seeing the biggest improvement. So what does that mean? It means that the better we can get the students working together, the better they're going to perform individually, which is sort of contradictory in a way. But when you think about it, it's not, right? And it's not for a couple of reasons. One, I believe strongly, and I think most people do, that students learn really well from each other. And the research supports that. And the better they can collaborate, the better they're going to learn from each other. So that's one reason I think we're seeing a greater improvement in student individual performance when collaboration is really supported. The other reason I think is this: if students are engaging in turn taking, they're only engaged in the lesson for 1/3 of the time. Right? If they are collaborating, like really collaborating well, then they're engaged for the entire lesson. And that just means that they're going to learn more. Longer engagement, more learning. So these things, coupled with some work that I had been doing on what it takes to actually build a thinking student, like what are the competencies that thinking students develop inside of a thinking classroom, and how do we leverage those competencies? How do we develop those competencies? Kind of coalesced together to mean that chapter 12 is far too important to leave in the fourth toolkit. It's making such a big difference. So then the question was, where does it go? Does it go in the second toolkit? Does it go in the first toolkit? Because now I was sort of stuck in a situation where how do we implement that on day one in a classroom with students who had never experienced thinking classrooms before? Well, I didn't have to wait too long because I had the chance to test that in September, Southern California. I went into an Algebra 1 class, and I got to test what it's like to bring something like Chapter 12 on day one of a BTC experience. And it worked amazing. But in order for that to work, it had to be stripped down. It couldn't be this multi-indicator rubric that we're going to co-develop together. That was just too big of a lift. So I simply drew an arrow, and the arrow was a one-way arrow, just like in chapter 12. On the left end was turn taking, on the right end was collaborating. And then I asked the students to tell me what was the difference between turn taking and collaborating, and they could. The turn taking is where I do one, and then my partner does another, and then my partner does another. And then the question I always ask them is, all right, so what are your partners doing while you're doing the first question? And the answer from the students is nothing. They're doing nothing. And my response to that is, on a good day, they're doing nothing. On a bad day, they're walking across the room talking to their friend, they're playing on their cell phone, they're disrupting, they're disparaging, they're creating havoc. So on a good day, they're doing nothing, and then everything goes downhill from there. So what's collaborating? And then they tell me what collaborating is, and then collaborating is building on each other's ideas. Everybody offers an idea. We share the responsibility for the task, whatever it is they say. And then I say, okay, good. Today we're working on collaborating. So what I want to see is collaborating, not turn taking. And then we get going. And it's such a simple single indicator rubric, but it's how you use it. Because after about 5 minutes of them working at the boards, I start interacting with the groups. Fingers up, everybody points. At the arrow, I make a mark, and then I ask them what they need to do to improve on. And there's a couple of things that are really powerful about this. One, the generality of this arrow, turn taking versus collaborating, is very non-specific. But now the specificity comes in as I'm interacting with the students. So what does this group need to improve on? And I was working in Algebra 2 class on Thursday, and I came up to a group, and everybody point, and their response was, we need to talk to each other. And I said, okay. So I write that down. I write it underneath the arrow, underneath the mark, where we're going to talk to each other. And then I walked away, and I said, I'll be watching for this. I came back and I said, so what do we mean by this, that we're going to talk to each other? Who are we going to talk to? And they're like, we're going to talk to everyone. Okay. So everyone's going to talk to each other. So I added the everyone. So, okay, I'll be watching for this. And I walk away, and I come back. I said, so I think we're not quite understanding what we mean by everyone here, because there was definitely one student that was not being included in the talking. And I'm like, so let's talk about what this everyone means. So like when we say we're going to talk to everyone, who's not being talked to? And then one of the girls in the group says, we're not talking to Sam. I'm like, so I erased part of what I had written, and I wrote, everyone talks to Sam. And I said, I'll be back. And then everything changed, right? So and that's just one example. The generality of the rubric allows me to get specific with a group about what it is they need to work on, right? Do they need to talk to each other? Do they need to listen to each other? Do they need to let the marker rest and talk about the task before they actually start writing? Do they need to face each other when they're talking to each other? Do they need to use each other's names? All of these are valid things. So this idea of the single indicator rubric, and I've done it over 50 times since September in classrooms with teachers, and every single time, the number one comment coming out of that lesson was, I can't believe what a difference that made in the collaboration in the room. Now, that's not the only single indicator rubric we use. We use other ones as well. I recorded a sort of mini workshop on it with handouts and scripts and everything. And you can find it on the New Building Thinking Classroom YouTube channel. It's right there, and you can get everything you need from it. So yeah, I know, short question, long answer, but there you go. It's so exciting. The difference it's making in classrooms, the way it's transforming groups, the way groups who don't want to work together are working together. And I know that there's a lot of people listening to this who are thinking, oh yeah, that's great for elementary. That's not going to fly with my geometry students. No, it's working amazing with the high school students as well. And I think the reason is that nobody wants to be in a dysfunctional group, right? Nobody wants to be in a group that's dysfunctional. And what this is doing, and I think they recognize this, that this is helping these groups be functional. And that makes them embrace building thinking classrooms just so much more.
Thanks, Peter. I agree. I use it, and I find it works really well, and I really like the flexibility of it. It's
Yeah.
because it's written on there and you can add to it. It's really a really powerful tool.
And I just wanted to mention before our next question that we put the link to the YouTube channel and the I
Newsletter.
lost my train of thought. Yeah, and the newsletter are in the chat, so people can feel free to click on that, and we'll put them again at the end also in case it gets lost, because we know how that goes.
All right, moving to the next question. So restating what Abigail said in the chat is the YouTube link and the link to the newsletter. If you're not already getting newsletters, there's a lot of new stuff coming out and you want to get access to that. But Peter, would you please take a moment and talk a little bit about BTC in history and or science?
Yeah, so I love these. I love engaging in these sorts of things. I actually have some lessons coming up in 2 weeks where I'm going to be in language arts, science, and Spanish. So I have these lessons coming up, and building thinking classrooms maps into all of these. It looks different, and we've talked about this before. Random groups looks the same. Vertical whiteboards looks the same, right? Not answering their questions looks the same. What looks different primarily is what is the task and what is a sequence of tasks that we can engage the students in. And there's a whole bunch of different things that we can do in this space. And I've been playing with this, trying to create structures and so on and so forth. And it will eventually all come out when it all coalesces together. But I'm going to give you an example of a science activity that I did. I did with a group of adult learners based on their curriculum that they were going to then take and work with their students. Okay. So I haven't done this lesson with students yet, but I'm going to give this example anyway, because I think it landed really well. So what I did was they had a topic on environment and protecting the environment and things that are harmful for the environment and what they need to, and trying to sensitize students to the environment. And usually the way a lesson would go on this would be the teachers would pass on information to the students, either by having them read the textbook, or they would show them a video, or they would give a lecture, or they need to fill the students with information, right? Because the students, there's a whole bunch of stuff that the students don't know. That's not how this lesson goes. So the way this lesson goes is we start by giving the students a stack of 10 little slips of paper. Each slip of paper on it has something that is bad for the environment. All right. So it's incorrect disposal of batteries, the dairy industry, the meat industry, DoorDash, ordering online shopping. There is brushing your teeth, right? Like there is all of these things that are bad for the environment. And then we give them all of these slips of paper at the same time. And then what we tell the students to do is they have to organize it. Now they can organize it any way they want, right? They can make a Venn diagram, they can make a table, they can create categories, they can make a tree diagram. They can do whatever they want, but they're going to organize this. They have these 10 things that are bad for the environment, and you have to organize it. Now, some of the organizers that you're going to see is you're going to see a consumer producer organization with this, which is a beautiful organization. And it has an overlap. So it's kind of like a Venn diagram, right? There is the consumers or producers, and then some things that are sort of in the middle. You could see one that is, it pollutes the air, it pollutes the water, it pollutes the land, and then there are overlaps. Of course, you could see a tree diagram that does either one of these things, right? You'll see an organization where it's things, and this could be actually a continuum, which is things that I have total control over versus things I have no control over, and then everything sort of landing on that continuum somewhere, right? Either way, they organize it in any way they want. And they may not know a lot about these things, but they understand that these things could be bad for the environment. They question brushing their teeth, but they're going to look at it. After they finish their organization, their next prompt, because we always need a continuing task, is, and we hand them a different color marker, and we say, now what you're going to do is you're going to write down next to each slip of paper, and that might require them to actually draw arrows and stuff to get to that slip of paper, but a list of why is it bad for the environment? Why do you think it's bad for the environment? So then they're gonna list these things out. They're going entirely on instinct, prior knowledge, intuition. After they finish that, we give them a different color marker, and now it's like, what can you do about it? What can you personally do about these things that are bad for the environment? So they have to add that. So this board, which starts off with maybe some graphic organizer and then 10 slips of paper, is now really filling up with details, right? After they have finished that, we come and give them a single piece of paper. Now, this single piece of paper is about 400 words, 350 words, and it's a little paragraph on each of these 10 things. And the title is Why These Things Are Bad for the Environment. And they get to now add to their why list. So they get to expand on things that they've intuited. Then we do the same thing for here's a sheet of paper that is what can we do about it? And so now they can add to the what can we do about it. By the way, these two pieces of information, AI generated. I'm using AI for this. I'm asking it to, I've given it the 10 things. I want AI to tell me why they're bad. And I'm cross-referencing this. I'm reading it. I'm proofreading it, reading it. I asked it to not go over 350 words and to generate this. And the kids are filling this in. And then when we consolidate this lesson, and I'm talking about the kids, I'm talking about the learners. These were adult learners, but the kids would do this. And then we would consolidate this. And the main thrust, I think, of this lesson has to do really with, and this is actually the new movement around environmental protection, is that we want to move people to make small changes, right? That the research is showing that if everybody makes a small change, it has a way bigger impact than if a few people make a big change. Our social consciousness drives us to want to petition big oil and things like that. But the reality is we're not going to stand out there and boycott oil. Like, we're just not. But what if we just consume dairy one day less a week? Or what if we shop local, right? What if we turn the tap off when we brush our teeth? Like, the research is really clear on this, that if you want to have a big environmental impact, it is a lot of people making a small change. And that's the upshot of this lesson. Now, that lesson looks very different. And the main structure it's following is a sort of conventional lesson will put info first and then the students know. And what this one does is they have to think first, then comes the info, and then they know, right? Because if you give the info first, what's the motivation to think? Right? So now they have to think first. But it's not good enough to think. They have to make a commitment. So they actually have to write things down on the board. And that turned out to be really, really important. But this is a really cool lesson that I think a lot of people can think about how you can generalize that into other ways of teaching, say, science or social science. Does that help you, Monica?
Oh, absolutely. And I can see taking the textbook curriculum and doing the same thing, tweak it and pull the important nibbles or crumbs out ahead of time and doing that for them.
Yeah. Right. But we want to have them engage in the thinking before they get the info, because that heightens their curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could say more about that, but we got to leave something for the next one.
All right. Our next question then is kind of going back to talking about the toolkits a little bit. We know that you've also made some updates besides the single point indicator rubric and chapter 12, but also in the consolidation or the closing practices. And so we were wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
So again, what we're talking about is the developmental framework that's in chapter 15 of the Orange Book and in all of the other books since then, and the updates to it. So we talked already about how chapter 12, which was in Toolkit 4, was moved up. First, I tried to get it into Toolkit 2, but it turned out to be so effective on a day one that it's in Toolkit 1. in its newer stripped down version. That doesn't mean we don't go bigger with it later, but on day one, we can certainly go with a single indicator rubric. And then, so then what else changes, right? So the first thing to understand about these frameworks is that toolkit, or this framework, toolkit 1 is 4 practices now, right? Thinking tasks, random groups, vertical whiteboard, single indicator rubric. And there's a bunch of things we know about toolkit 1. We got to do all 4 together. Okay. And because that drives the change in the classroom that then drives student behavior change, right? One of the things we learned in our research was if we don't do things different, the students don't behave different. So this creates a big enough difference in the way the students experience the classroom that they behave differently. Once they're out of toolkit 4, then you have to go, once you're out of those 4 practices in toolkit 1, you move into toolkit 2. Toolkit 2 has 5 practices. You do them one at a time. The order doesn't matter. Then you move into toolkit 3, 3 practices, one at a time. The order does matter. And then finally, toolkit 4, there's 2 practices. You do them one at a time, and the order does matter. But you're doing these one at a time, which means that the boundaries between, say, toolkit 2 and toolkit 3 and toolkit 3 and toolkit 4 aren't that important because we're doing them one at a time. They cluster together because they have something that holds them in common, but you're doing them one at a time. So if a teacher moves from toolkit 2 to toolkit 3, it's not like the students are going to notice that we've switched toolkits. You're just adding one more practice, right? So the boundaries are there to help you think about them conceptually, but they do cluster in this way. And for example, one of the differences is in toolkit 2, the order doesn't matter, but in toolkit 3, the order does matter, right? So you can't just throw them all into one big bucket. So what is the big difference? So this is all to say that chapter 9, which was thin slicing, flow, moved from toolkit 3 to toolkit 2, but it only moved across the boundary, right? So it's still the last practice in toolkit 2. You can put it anywhere you want, but it isn't really that big of a shift. Chapter 7, which was in toolkit 2, which is how we do check your understanding questions, has moved to toolkit 3 to sit with the other closing practices, right? Check your understanding questions, or starting with consolidation, notes, and then check your understanding questions. But ironically, it's in a different order in the toolkits, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The closing practices, we spent a lot of time talking about that in the last time we were together and the time before that. And you can refer back to those. It's also a really seminal part of the grassroots workshop. So if you're taking that, there's an entire module dedicated to this. One of the things that's really important to understand about this framework is that it's a framework, right? It's for you it provides you guidance and helps you grow your practice. One of the things that we have to remember is that the framework is the order in which we implement the building thinking classroom practices. It is not the order in which they occur within a lesson, right? So if in a lesson, I'm going to launch the lesson, that's chapter 6, that's in toolkit 2, right? Then we're thin slicing, I'm avoiding answering their questions, toolkit 2, toolkit 2. We're heading into the closing. The first thing they're going to see in the closing is consolidation, which is toolkit 3. Notes, consolidate, toolkit 3. Check your understanding questions, toolkit 3. But if you're looking at the framework, the first practice you encounter in toolkit 3 is chapter 7, which is check your understanding questions, which is the easiest of the closing practices to implement, right? So it's why again, the order lives differently in the developmental framework, the implementation sequence, than it does in the sequence it would occur in a lesson. Yeah. Now, I will say just a few more things, because I think the next question is going to have something to do with, like, how long should we be spending in these toolkits? So I mentioned earlier that there are 4 things we know about toolkit 1. 1, we got to do all 4 together. Number 2, we have to start with a non-curricular. We've talked about that a lot previously. So we have to start with a non-curricular that makes it easier for everyone to get on the train It lowers the prerequisite knowledge that everybody needs. It reduces stress on the students and on the teacher. We can engage in it in a playful, fun way. So we have to start with a non-curricular, right? So number one, we do all four together. Number two, we start with a non-curricular. Number three, we actually start with 3 to 5 non-curriculars because students can't learn a new pattern of behavior from one experience. They need to have multiple non-curricular experiences to build up that pattern of behavior and to build a culture of thinking within their own practice as learners. And I know that that's stressful for teachers. We'll get that time back later. And number four, we got to get out of toolkit one, right? Like 2 weeks is all you need in toolkit one, then move on, get into toolkit two. There's so many important practices in toolkit two that are really going to help you fine tune the pedagogy of your thinking classroom. Does that mean everything is ready after 2 weeks? No, they're not all perfect, but we move on because we got to get to toolkit three. That's where the closing of the lesson is, which is so important. We got to get to those practices to closing the lesson.
Okay, it's my turn. So we're just curious about what you think about the divergent versus the convergent curricular tasks. How many or how much of each should we use? How does that balance out? What does that look like for you?
Oh, that's such a great question. Okay, so what does it look like? Oh, first of all, let me tell you what it looks like for you. All right, and that depends on where you are geographically. So when I'm working in, for example, Northern Europe, I would say almost 50% of the tasks that teachers use are divergent, which means that, and for those of you who are just picking up on this language, it's a rich curricular task, right? It's a rich task. We're gonna get to lots of mathematics out of it. Think split 25, which is in both the Burgundy book and the Orange book, right? These are tasks that students are going to bump into a lot of mathematics. We're going to be able to cover a fair bit of content. It's got depth, it's got breadth, right? The kids are going to engage in it. They almost feel like they're not doing math. It feels like they're playing, right? So this is a divergent task. And the reason it's called a divergent task is that I'm going to give the same task to every group, but every group is going to do it differently, right? And when that task diverges, I have to close my lesson differently, right? And this is really, really key. It's really talked about in the Green and the Burgundy book, but we talked a lot about that also in previous episodes here together. So that divergence requires a different type of closing. Okay. But that divergence is also so rich and the kids are having such a great time and it's so much fun. And in Northern Europe, most of their curricula are very competency driven, very problem-based driven. So there is a lot more of those divergent tasks built into their curriculum. And indeed, there's assessments. Okay. When I'm working in the US, in most places, divergence I would see maybe 10% of the time, right? Most of the US curriculum is really driven to a much more skills-based and becoming proficient with those skills because the standardized assessments that you're engaging in really test those things. The curricula are written around those skills. That's not to say that there aren't brilliant resources out there that are divergent, and I'm hoping teachers are accessing them, but there is this sort of march towards convergence, right? That we're really much more focused on skills when I'm working in the US. Canada depends on where we are in Canada and British Columbia. I would say that there's certainly room for maybe 30%, and that's just a percentage I'm throwing out there. But it's like I feel like I have more permission to use divergent tasks in BC, even as much as Northern Europe, up to 50%, right? So it really is what it looks like for you, right? It varies geographically. What does it look like for me if I'm teaching? So if I was going to be parachuted into some town in the US somewhere, I would probably aim for about 50% divergence. right? I want to tap into all of those rich resources of divergence, rich tasks. I want to use those. I want to suck every little bit of mathematics out of it. And I have to really compensate for the divergence with having a strong closing, right? The more divergent the task is, the stronger you got to be at closing that thing, because when everybody does it different, you risk that some students are not meeting the learning intention of the day, right? So I have to close that lesson. I have to be really conscientious about how I'm going to bring closure in a way that it doesn't matter if only two groups made a graph. I need everyone to see that graph. And I need everyone to then go away and make notes about that graph. And they need to do a check your understanding question about that graph, because I have to create convergence out of the divergence. Now, I do that. I'm a pretty confident teacher. I feel good about the math. I feel good about everything that I'm doing. I don't have, and I'm assuming that when I get parachuted into this small town, I don't have someone breathing over my shoulder, breathing down my neck, looking over my shoulder, telling me that I'm not allowed to do that, and so on and so forth, right? Like these are like no gravity, no friction, zero air pressure. I'm just going to cruise through and do exactly what I want, right? So in my world, I would use divergence as much as possible. I would tap into all of those rich resources that exist out there. All the open middle, the estimate 180, all the graph stuff. Like I would play with all of these things and try to squeeze so much math out of them. Right? That's me.
So is it fair to say, sort of asking, generalizing, it depends primarily on what your curriculum is, wherever you are, and does it vary? You mentioned kind of geographically. Does it vary by level of math? Does primary look different than upper level math based on which type of task you might use?
Yeah, of course, right? Like I think it's pretty easy to find a rich task that's going to hit adding, multiplying, dividing, and multiplying. Or I've already said that. But hitting a whole bunch of operations for two-digit numbers, right? Like it's pretty easy to find a rich task that's going to have the kids engaging and playful and so on. It gets harder when I'm doing trig on a circle with radians, right? Like it's getting harder to find those super rich tasks the more abstract the curriculum gets. They still exist, and you still got to squeeze everything you can out of that. But so I would say it varies by grade level. By curriculum, that's a funny one, right? And because I think we have a very deep misunderstanding of what curriculum is. So I'm just going to take you through this a little bit. So when I think about curriculum, I think about the what, the how, and the models that I'm going to use. Okay, so the what is what I have to teach. That's your state standards, right? That's your provincial learning outcomes. That is what your government has told you have to teach, and we have to teach that by law. So that's the what. The how is the pedagogy I'm going to bring to it. Am I going to do a jigsaw? Am I going to do group work here? Am I going to have the kids at the whiteboards? Am I going to have those, or am I going to choose to have two groups come together and debate something at the whiteboards? Am I right? Like this is the pedagogy. That's the how I bring to this. And then the models are the models that I'm going to use. So I was just doing a lesson on adding fractions. So am I going to use a bar model, a part whole model? Am I going to use the number line model, right? Like these are the models that I want to use. And I want to use multiple models, but these are the models that I'm going to use to try to achieve the outcome that students know how to add fractions, right? So that's different from the what, and it's different from the how. It becomes a sort of a metaphor in which I'm going to work. So in most places in the world, they separate out curriculum. Curriculum is just the what, right? So in most places in the world, curriculum is the what you have to teach. You can bring your own how, and you can bring your own models. The curriculum is just the what. In the US, when we talk about curriculum, often curriculum has become all of those things, right? So, but there's only one of those things that we're legally bound to teach, and that's the what portion of it. So I always encourage teachers to, bring your own what. Like you need to bring that professional autonomy into that room and decide what is the best pedagogy in the moment, and what is the best model you're going to use today, and what is the sequence of models you're going to implement, and which models are you not going to use, and so on and so forth. And we have a name for this. This is professional autonomy, right? So for me, it wouldn't matter at all which curriculum you gave me, because I would look at that curriculum and I would look at the what that curriculum is trying to impose, and then I would bring my own how and my own models to that, right? But again, that's in the perfect world where I don't have someone breathing down my neck, right? So we have to negotiate that space between what it is that teachers want, or what it is that maybe administrators want teachers to be doing, and so on and so forth. Does that kind of help answer your question a little bit, Don?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
So, Peter, we have about 15 more minutes. So a couple other things we wanted to ask. So one was there was some requests for, we gave a science example, but if you have a social science example, that would be something people are interested in hearing. Or if you, or if you have a favorite lesson that you've done recently in any of the classrooms you've been in, we would also love to hear about that.
Okay, I would love to share a lesson that I did recently. It was, in fact, I just recorded this for the YouTube channel, so I have it all there. It's going to be all there, and with what were the tasks and so on. But I was working with a teacher, and the topic was dividing decimals by a whole number. Okay, so this was, I want to say fourth grade, could have been fifth grade. But it was, for example, 0.24 divided by 4. Or if you're in that space, 24 hundredths divided by 4, right? But not 24 hundredths written as a fraction, 24 hundredths written as a decimal. So the teacher had been doing a really good job throughout the unit, working on a whole bunch of decimal concepts. And one of the concepts that they had been working on is multiplying and dividing by powers of 10, and coming up to this last lesson of the unit. And it was this sort of frustration that, well, we've been working on so much of division using area model and partial quotient and skip counting on the number line. And now it just feels like it's going to be long division, move the decimal, and then perform long division in the way that just that sort of algorithmic way. And I really wish, her sentiment to me was, I really wish I could use some of these models like area model and partial quotients. And we can, right? Like we can do area model with decimals, and we can do partial quotients with decimals without moving the decimal. And it's kind of ick, right? Like we can do it, but it's got this massive cognitive load on the kids. So, but I asked her, I said, like, how good are they at multiplying and dividing by powers of 10? She goes, oh, they're really good at it. So the way I launched the lesson was I just started with, I'm just going to rapid fire a whole bunch of questions that are multiplying and dividing by powers of 10. And the kids were just nailing it, right? Like, what's 4 times 100? What's decimal 4 divided by 10? What's 4 divided by 1,000? Like, just firing these at them. And the kids were all answering them. So we actually built up kind of a table. And they got it. They know how to do this. And that's a good competency to have. They were very proficient, very fluid with it. So then I wrote up the question of the day. So I said, okay, so today we're going to learn how to do this. And I wrote out 0.24 divided by 4. And the kids were kind of like, you could see right away, they were trying to think about it. They were thinking, they knew that the answer had to have a 6, but they didn't know, like, was it 6? Was it decimal 6? They just didn't, they knew the 6 was implicated somehow. And so the question I asked them was, well, what question do you really want to answer? Like you don't want to answer this one. Which one do you really want to answer? And they're like, we want to answer 24 divided by 6. And so I wrote that. So I drew an arrow from 0.24 divided by 6 and I drew an arrow to the right, and I wrote 24 divided by 6. And I said, so how'd you get there? And they're like, we multiplied by 100. Okay, perfect. So I wrote times 100 on top of the arrow. I said, well, so how are we going to answer this? And they're like, well, we can do partial quotients. We can do do area model. We can just know the answer. And I said, okay, so you do it any way you want. Turn and talk. What's the answer? So they turn and talk. They got an answer. And I said, what's the answer? And they're like, it's 6. So I drew an arrow and I said, what methods did you use? Or could we have used? And I wrote out some of the methods. I didn't do them. I just wrote them out so that I really wanted to value that we can use multiple methods. And then I said, so yeah, but that's not the answer to the question that I asked you earlier. The question I asked you was decimal 24 divided by 6. So like, how do we get this converted to the right answer? And they're like, oh, well, we got to divide by 100. Why did you divide by 100? Because we multiplied by 100 to make the new question. So we got to divide by 100 to make the correct answer. So drew another arrow and off they went. And they just plowed through this content and they were having such a good time. And it was this idea that if you don't like the question you're being asked, change the question to something you like, but keep track of what you did to change it and then change it back. And by the end, they were doing questions like, so some of the really cool ones were 0.3 divided by 5. Right. And why this one is kind of tricky because the temptation is to just multiply by 10 to get 3 divided by 5, but that's still not the question I want to answer. Right. So recognizing that sometimes they have to multiply by a power of 10 that was greater than the number of decimals they wanted to get rid of. And that actually allowed them to get to questions like 3 divided by 6. Where they were able to show why it's 0.5 through this process. Anyway, it was one of those great lessons where the kids really felt in control the whole time. When we turned them loose on the check your understanding questions, every single student started either at medium or spicy, and they were just devouring this and having that mastery experience. And bonus, we covered a lot of content, right? Like that wasn't the goal, but we did cover more than one day. We probably covered 3 days worth of content in one lesson there. And just with full understanding and always feeling like they had mastery over what it was they were doing and not just following some algorithm that they weren't understanding.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. It sounds super fun. I love those lessons where like everyone's like diving, right? It's great.
Yeah, that was a really fun one.
Well, we would like to kind of wrap things up. We wanted to share a few things. Abigail, we dropped at the beginning of the chat or at the live stream the Building Thinking Classrooms newsletter. If you have not already signed up for that, we definitely want you to sign up for that. And then there is also a behaviors lesson that Peter has already pre-recorded and put on their YouTube link. So we will drop
that's the single indicator rubric one, how we use single indicator rubrics to shape student behavior. Yeah.
Okay. I'm also going to share my personal YouTube where our old 6 Facebook Live recordings live. So you can go back and watch them. Each of them have timestamps about the topics that there are. So there's some great information in there. Let's see what else is there. We will also, I think all of y'all are part of our Facebook group, but one of the cool things about the BTC Facebook group is that it is a place over 70,000 strong now that you can ask your questions. If you have a question about thin slicing, there's probably a summer recording in there where Abigail has broke down how to do thin slicing. We have some old recordings of Don going over his assessment and grading practices. There's a wealth of knowledge hosted in that Facebook group.
Can I just speak to that?
Of course.
One of the things that we learned in Building Thinking Classrooms is that the smartest person in the room is the room. And what Monica is talking about is the room of 70,000 strong people on the Facebook group. Like, just think how smart that room is, right? You will get your questions answered. And everybody in there has a stake in it. And you share that knowledge.
To add sort of to what Monica and Peter were just saying, all of those live stream events, whether it was the ones we did with Peter, and this is now the 7th one, as well as the ones that we did over the summer ourselves, that Monica pointed out a couple of them, they can all be found in one place on the Facebook group. So if you go to events, which is where you would have found the link to join this one, and you'll have to scroll way down. There's, I don't know, what, 50, 70, I don't know what number of various recordings are there with all those kinds of things. And we typically do those over the summer because we have time. So presumably that'll happen again this summer, and everyone's welcome. And as Peter said, basically the more people that join, the better it is.
Smart of the room.
Someone in the messages asked if we had a book study for one of the new books. No, that hasn't come up, but that might be a good idea. If you want to join, we may talk about that this summer. We generally do one of the original ones. Sorry, I was looking to see if there's anything else in the chat.
There is a question from Beth about the grassroots workshop and whether it includes a new research or not. And the answer to that is yes. It is all of the research is living research, so it's always evolving. The nice thing about the grassroots workshop is that it is evergreen, meaning that anytime that I have something new, we can record new stuff and put it into that workshop. So every cohort is going to get a slightly different version as the workshop updates. Currently, it's got all of the new stuff on the closing practices. It's got some of the new stuff on the single indicator rubric, and it has the new framework. So it's always being updated.
I might add a couple of things here about the book studies. If we'll talk about that and get back to you guys, especially as we kind of plan like our summer sessions. If anyone is really wanting to lead a book study discussion, like send me a DM on Facebook, and we can talk about that. Also, someone is asking about video recordings. Video recordings of classrooms are a little tricky because of student privacy. Like I know I have some that I'm allowed to share, like at conferences and things. If you send me a DM, I might be able to share with you personally, but I'm not going to post widely. There are a few people in our group though that do have permission to share videos of their students publicly. Doug Doblar is one of them. And so if you search his name in the Facebook group, you'll see some videos, and he has really great blog posts that go along with his videos. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that, but okay. All right.
For an administrative thing, right? Just if you are going to post something that has student pictures or videos, you need to also have that permission and specifically say that you have that permission. Otherwise, we take it down because it's a violation of student privacy.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think
Sydney, I see your comment there. Sydney, can you send me an email? peter@buildingthinkingclassrooms.com. I want to talk to you more about that. I also want to just highlight what Monica said, right? Like it can be overwhelming to sit down and want to watch through all of the 7 videos and I referenced a lot just for time here we've talked about this before because I want to preserve the time for the newer stuff. But the timestamps that have been put into those videos are an invaluable resource, right? So that you don't have to watch all of the videos. You can look for that topic and then go to that timestamp and hear about it. It's not my style typically to do that, to reference away to things that you have to always go and look for more, but it's such a great resource and it's so well indexed that I felt I could do that here.
All right, Peter. Well, we're at the hour mark, which is we appreciate you giving an hour of your time to talk to us every so often. I assume you'd like to do this again sometime. Every time we wrap these up, that's what you say.
Of course.
So we'll take you up on that at some point in the future.
Every 3 months or so, every 4 months. So
yeah, we do usually one in the summer, one in the winter, sometimes in the spring. But whenever you're willing to do it, we have a lot of people that are willing to participate. So again, thanks so much for doing that, and thanks to everybody who came today. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah. And thanks to everybody who was here. If you happen to see me out and about, I'll be at the opening keynote in Indiana, NCTM, next week, 2 weeks from now. So if you're there, come and say hi. Other than that, just I look forward to next time. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you.